patient acquisition and financing become even more important, in my opinion, in an economic downturn.
People want to look their best. They want to be beautiful. They want to look and feel their very best.
Yeah.
And they're going to pay for it one way or another.
Right.
And you're giving them a vehicle with which to pay for it. Welcome back to the Technology of Beauty, where I have the opportunity to interview the movers and the shakers of the beauty business. And today is no exception. Today we have the privilege of interviewing Tim Syed, who's come all the way up from the San Diego area. And we're going to get to know about his new company. He's a fellow plastic surgeon and an entrepreneur. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be here. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for making the drive up.
Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it.
Well, so first let's start with this.
Sure.
Where'd you go to school? Where'd you grow up?
So I was born in Egypt. My parents came to the States for graduate school. So first part of my life was spent in Providence, Rhode Island. And then we moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, where actually most of my formative years were. We then moved, because my parents were in the oil industry, so we moved to Texas. So I graduated from high school in Plano, Texas. Yeah. And then I went out to the Bay Area for college and medical school. So I went to Berkeley and then UCSF for medical school. I then went to the East Coast for my general surgery residency at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and then returned back to UCSF for plastic surgery. And then if that wasn't enough different places to have spent time, I moved out to South Florida for about 12, 13 years, where I joined a group practice in plastic surgery and worked with them for about almost 10 years. And then I started to get this entrepreneurial bug, and maybe I went through a midlife crisis, you could say, and decided I wanted to explore some other, extracurricular activities related to my profession as a plastic surgeon and as a physician, but kind of taking advantage of some of my other interests and backgrounds. So
I want to go back a little bit because I'm curious. So you trained at UCSF in plastics.
Yeah.
Who was your chair?
Dr. Mathis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, when I was a med student, Steve and Dr. Nahai both were just starting. They had just finished their residency and they were working on their myocutaneous flat book.
Yeah.
And I did the cadaver preps for them, and they would come on Saturdays.
That's amazing.
And Steve actually was an attending at Barnes Hospital at WashU for 1 year before he went up to, was it Michigan? For 1 year before
I think so, and then he came back.
And then he went over to UCSF.
Yeah. Well, it's a small world, of course. I mean, Dr. Nahai's son was a resident with me, and of course I know David Mathis very well.
Yes.
And so this, that's one of the wonderful things about our profession is that there's this sort of, community. Everyone's 1 to 2 degrees of separation, both among our colleagues and also with our colleagues in industry, and with the various companies that support our industry. So that's what I think is great. What you're doing here with the podcast is that you're really bringing members of these disparate parts of our community and really having this dialogue. So.
And as you say, we're all related in 1 or 2 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
I want to go back to Florida.
Sure.
You said South Florida. So what part, specifically what city or what area?
Yeah, so I joined a group practice in Palm Beach County.
Palm Beach, okay.
It was called Plastic Surgery of Palm Beach. And it was, it was really a great proving ground coming out of residency, because it was a large practice. We were on staff at 8 hospitals. We did a mix of reconstructive and aesthetic surgery. And, it was a great environment to learn in sort of a chaperoned way about the business of plastic surgery, but also how to stay out of trouble, take good care of patients, to kind of figure out what lane you want to be in. Because I think we get trained so broadly in plastic surgery, and there's so many different things we can do. And we are the most general of general surgeons. We can do everything. We can operate all over the body, and old and young, and all genders. And so that environment was really good for me. And I had moved there really for, personal life reasons as much as professional life reasons at the time. And like many people, both of those scenarios kind of just evolved and changed for me. And because I was there in South Florida, I then, when I was looking at some of these other entrepreneurial opportunities, I would say that at the time I was what I call a wantapreneur, kind of want to be an entrepreneur, but haven't really taken any real risks, like always sort of being comfortable kind of hedging those risks. And so I actually did an executive MBA program at Kellogg. They have a campus in Miami, and that was sort of very convenient to still be working. And
Kellogg has a campus in Miami? I thought it was online.
No.
So, I didn't realize that. I was reading your CV. Okay. So there was actually a campus there.
Right. Yeah. So it was great. It's, 1 hour drive down, spend a long weekend with classmates who would come in from, Ukraine, Colombia, Venezuela, all around the United States. And we would meet every month. And then we had some live-in weeks. So we spent some time in Chicago, some time in Hong Kong, and some spent time in Israel and Germany and Toronto. So it was a really great, again, another community that I, consider myself fortunate to be a part of.
Absolutely.
This sort of business community that brought a lot of perspectives that we don't necessarily see when we're in our little silo of even though we have a broad specialty, we get very siloed in sort of thinking, well, my whole life is about selling my time for money and how much business can I do per hour of my work. And in many ways, that's as a service-oriented, profession that we're in. That's no different, really, from being, other valued service professions like being a plumber or, or a carpenter or or an attorney or, where you basically have to say, I think that my service is worth this because I've invested the effort to try to be among the top of my peer group. I think I deliver a better service or a better product. And you should, place faith in that. But at the end of the day, learning from people who are in other types of businesses where they have scalable models, for what you and I do. I mean, you're obviously involved in many entrepreneurial ventures. You're a lot of my generation and the generation following me in plastic surgery obviously look up to you and the things you've done. And as an example, how you can be a very successful clinical plastic surgeon, but you can also avail yourself of the opportunities to get involved with industry and it really starts with just kind of opening your mind to networking with people. And so the motto of our MBA program was Think Bravely. And I really like that because for many of us, we're not necessarily accustomed to wanting to be that brave as a surgeon, right? You want to be conservative and you want to be safe, of course. Those are prime directives. So for me, it was really eye-opening. And then, I had a technology background from my undergrad degree was electrical engineering, computer science. And I had always been very interested in, computer technology, medical devices. And I had sort of done that with the idea that I wanted to be a surgeon. I got bitten by that bug when I was a junior high student in Utah, and the artificial heart program was going on at the University of Utah. And I come from a family of engineers primarily, so I wanted to use this kind of engineering science or technology to help out, the human condition. And my interest in cardiac surgery kind of started at that point. But then once I had my rotations on plastics and cardiac and in my surgical residency, I just felt more of a kinship with the plastic surgeon, surgeons and their work-life balance and just the creativity really, to me, was compelling.
So when you went to med school, if I would have asked you what you're going to be when you grew up, you would have said a cardiac surgeon?
Yeah, I had done some research in a cardiac lab at UCSF, I'm still very fascinated, obviously, by the technology and the physiology and the orchestration. The cardiac surgeon is the sort of orchestra conductor of all these moving parts in the OR. But I wouldn't say that I had the best. I would say role models in going through those rotations compared to the experience I had with, people like Dr. Mathis and Bill Hoffman at UCSF, and then Dr. May and Andy Lee and others at MGH when I was a general surgery resident there. I'm very fortunate. I had the opportunity to operate with Steve Mathis, with Jim May, with Harry Bunke, Gil Gradinger, all these great leaders in our field. Because of these opportunities.
Absolute giants, all friends of mine and mentors of mine.
Yeah.
Actually. That's fantastic. Well, I've just learned a bunch that I didn't know. That's fantastic. So there you are in Florida.
Yep.
And you leave Florida and you move to Southern California. What were you thinking?
Yeah,
you're 13 years into your practice.
Right.
You're what age at that point? 45?
So it was about 45, yeah.
Okay. You're 45. You wake up one morning, sunny morning in Florida, and you say, I'm moving to Southern California.
Yeah.
What possessed you?
Yeah, not exactly. It's sort of, obviously it wasn't tax time, or I would have probably not made that move. But no, it wasn't quite that linear. When I was about 10 years into my career, the opportunity presented itself to get involved again in this kind of technology sector. So one of my friends, who's a practicing dermatologist who also trained at Mass General, and he had joined a really big dermatology group in Palm Beach, and then he co-founded Modernizing Medicine, which is now the leading EMR and practice management software solution for dermatology and top ranked, in a number of other specialties. And they approached me to build the plastic surgery vertical with them. So I actually looked at that opportunity and I said, it's going to require a certain amount of commitment. So that actually required that I leave the group that I had been a part of for almost a decade, and spread my wings a little bit. And I'm really glad I did it. It sort of forced me to take stock of the things I wanted to try to do, like in my 40s, and not look back on my 40s and say, well, I could have done these things and I just chose not to just kind of play it safe. And so I actually worked a couple days a week with ModMed. I built their plastic surgery product. I'm proud to say it gets ranked every year by some of the publications that review software as the top EMR for plastic surgeons. And I'm obviously an investor there and invested in Simplast, another leading EMR. And this kind of linear pathway of kind of taking the first leap and then a new door opens is really kind of what energizes me about entrepreneurship. And so I sort of got that product to a point of maturity, I felt, and then I was approached by a colleague of mine who has now passed away, but he was a physician entrepreneur, an anesthesiologist turned entrepreneur. He had developed a clinical analytics software platform many years earlier and had actually sold that to a leading health insurer. And they had been involved also in building the infrastructure for Google Health, which was a product ahead of its time, actually. And so he said, I know you're interested in the technology stuff you've been doing, the EMR work. We'd love to have you join our new venture where we're going to try to take, all the kind of information that we were taking for clinical analytics, for healthcare claims data and EMR data, but now we're going to bring in genomic data and, wearable data and social graph information and see what we can really learn about patients as people and all of the things that drive their health and their illness, and create value for payers and provider groups, accountable care organizations, and so on. So I came out to join that company. That's really what,
That's what brought you out
me to San Diego, yeah.
So you came out to join the company.
Yeah.
And did you give up clinical plastic surgery?
Not exactly. I mean, I took a somewhat of a sabbatical. I was actually still going back to Florida periodically, like every 6 weeks or so I'd go back and I'd have some patients lined up, a couple of cases and some of my established patients for follow-ups. And then there was a period of maybe 6 months where I really wasn't doing surgery and started to get a little nervous about getting rusty. You think that, and it is kind of like riding a bike, but you worry that you're going to kind of fall off the saddle, not be able to get back on. And so as the more recent company, Interpreta, as it was, we were reaching an inflection point that we were either going to very successfully exit to our strategic investor, which was Centene, it's the largest Medicaid insurer in the country, and they were investing in us and they were becoming our first enterprise customer, and we would either deliver well for them and they would acquire the company, or we would fail entirely, which is always sort of that risk when you're involved in an entrepreneurial venture. And either way, it was going to be time for me to get back into either a new startup or resume kind of a more full-time clinical practice. So I put the wheels in motion to start a solo practice while we were in kind of the last year as an independent company at Interpreta, and it got acquired, and that was nice to be a part of. I mean, I wasn't a founder, so it wasn't necessarily the economic life-changing thing that you sometimes look for as part of the advantages maybe of a successful startup. But I had a piece of the company. It was nice, and then but moving out to California really was priceless for me because I met my wife out here. We have two beautiful little kids, and so I look back at that move out here as the best decision I ever made.
And how long ago was that?
That was 2015 that I came out here, and the company was acquired, I think, in 2000, around 17 to 18. Yeah. So I've had this practice now for about 5 years.
Okay.
And it's a
Are
solo.
you a solo practice?
Yep. Yeah. So.
And you started another business.
Yeah. So I've actually been involved with a couple of other startups. The one we're here to talk about today is called Yes Doctor. And it was through some of these relationships. So I had a business school colleague of mine who said, a couple of friends of mine who are serial entrepreneurs. They've both had successful prior ventures. They are in Southern California. They're looking to start, they've actually laid the groundwork to start a patient financing and acquisition platform. And they need a subject matter expert who's a plastic surgeon who understands the business side from the customer vantage point. And she said, I also know that you've done some work in the technology side, so you can sort of speak the language. So when I was at Modernizing Medicine, I got certified in, I don't know if you know what this is, but as a Scrum Master. It's like one of the roles in software development that help teams know how to prioritize which things to work on for the next couple of weeks.
And that's a Scrum Master?
That's called a Scrum. So they have this thing called Scrum where it's like a huddle.
So you're Dr. Scrum Master.
Right. So, I actually have a certificate for it, and what it means is really just that I learned a lot being involved in these companies about, even though I'd had a computer science background, I hadn't used it in 20 years, and the whole landscape had changed. So I could not code myself out of a cardboard box until I kind of resumed and learned some things, and I learned about how people think about how to prioritize the development of products that serve the needs of their customers, right? So there's this whole movement in software design around what we call user-driven design, which is sort of like being an anthropologist and going into the workplace of your customers and see what it is what are their pain points, what are they trying to solve for, and how do you develop solutions that will solve it better for them than the existing solutions, or maybe there are no existing solutions. So that, because I could speak that language and knew a little bit about finance from the MBA, which I, again, didn't know really much about. I could BS my way through finance discussions, but I couldn't really read a P&L or a balance sheet the way I think I can now. So I think I just had the right combo maybe that they were looking for. And so they brought me on board as a co-founder. And our premise is really that we are a financing-driven customer or patient acquisition platform.
Now explain that to our listeners, because we have financing companies.
Sure.
And so I want you to compare and contrast. We have a number of them out there, Patient Fi,
sure,
Alpheon, Care Credit, and so forth.
Right.
So that's traditional financing, right?
Correct.
I'm sure they all have different nuances.
Right.
If you could help our listeners and myself compare and contrast what you offer versus, say, those.
Right.
Could you do that for us?
Yeah, great question. So, the patient journey, when a patient wants to have surgery with Dr. Grant Stevens, right, there are different ways they arrive at that decision. Some of that is they know what procedure they're interested in, but they're not really sure what's involved. How much is it going to cost? Who are the best doctors in my community? Am I willing to travel to go to the best doctor, period, for this procedure?
Okay.
By reputation or by patient testimonials. So there are platforms that do that, right? There are platforms, say RealSelf and other patient acquisition platforms where you can go online as a patient and say, I want to find out who does a great breast augmentation in the Los Angeles area. And your name will come up there organically, in part because of just reputation and content that you've created, partly maybe if you have ads that you sponsor and pay for that give you prominence and get you results on search engines. And then the testimonials of your patients out there who put reviews on Google and other things. And so there are various ways people can learn about you, but what they don't know often and you don't know, until very late often in the consultation process. They've made an appointment, they've seen you in the office, then they get the quote for surgery, and there may be some sticker shock, right? They say, well, I knew that you were one of the top, maybe you are priced a little bit more, but I don't know, I got to see if I can afford this. How am I going to pay for this? And then they begin the financing portion of the customer journey, the patient journey, and people fall out of the funnel at that point. And at that point, you as a surgeon, as a business owner, you have essentially paid a cost, both in time and actual potential cash outlay for advertising, and what I'm talking about, the acquisition cost, right?
Right, sure.
And in our industry, the acquisition costs can range from $150 to $300, $500, depending on the competitiveness of the market, the procedure of interest. How many people are looking for that, and what terms are they using that get you the best results. So somebody might look up breast implants, another person uses augmentation, another one is boob job, and those are all the same thing, but those terms may have different levels of authority or different levels of hit rate for you. And so your customer acquisition cost is a blend of all the channels that you spend on, your website, your marketing company, that all plays into how much it costs to get a patient in the door.
Right.
That patient value to you, their lifetime customer value, will depend in part on what they're coming in to buy and how frequently you can sell additional services to them by keeping them, as part of your community of patients. And so for us, as a surgeon myself, I participate with some of these financing platforms. I offer them. I'm an investor in Alpheon, right? As many of us participated in investment opportunities out there. So they're good companies, but they're essentially banks, right? They're banks that offer loan products.
Right.
I don't view them as really patient acquisition platforms.
Right.
I haven't had really some of these other companies tee up a patient for me and say, here's a patient that we've pre-qualified, we've pre-financed, we've helped you do some of the heavy lifting, and your staff do some of the heavy lifting of teaching them why you're good for this procedure and making sure that they're not just tire kicking and kind of maybe wasting your staff's time. I know some of my colleagues say, well, nobody's really wasting my time. As long as I get them in the office, we can sell them something. We can sell them some skincare. We can sell them a laser. But I'm not sure I believe that. And so our premise is that we are helping deliver pre-qualified, financed, interested patients who are farther down the funnel, and we're potentially opening up the top of the funnel by expanding lending opportunities. So
are you marketing to the greater audience?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the things I think where we're different is we're actually marketing to bring the patient into the top of the funnel.
So you're both patient acquisition and patient financing together.
Right. And the way I look at it is, if you have time in your schedule for, some surgeons obviously have long wait lists, but we all have patients that fall off the radar.
Sure.
The case gets canceled. You now have unfilled capacity. You basically, like I said earlier, we're basically selling our time for money. And how do you do that as a plastic surgeon? You can either charge more per hour of your time, or you can do more things in an hour. Right?
Okay.
So if you do 2 breast augmentations,
or
work longer hours, right? Exactly. So it's a cost volume profit model that's just very well established for service industries. And so when you have an unfilled slot in your schedule, that's an opportunity cost that you are paying. You're not generating revenue. You have fixed costs because you have an office to support. You have people that your mouths to feed, basically, rent to pay, and so on. So unfilled capacity, especially when you're in a high earning level or you have a business that delivers a highly valued service, is a better way to put it, really, to the customers, the patients. You deliver a very highly valued service. So for you to not be able to deliver that for an hour or two every couple of weeks is denying people access to you, and it's denying you, business growth, right? Business opportunity. So we believe that essentially for the same, if you want to call it a tax, it's really, there's a financing fee, of course, and that's how businesses that are in the business of lending for care or lending in general make money on fees, either on interest that they charge the patient that they're lending to, or financing fees that they charge to the vendor, the provider. So when in the case of a credit card is maybe very low, 2.7%, 3% to you as the provider, as the vendor of the service, but they can be very predatory, rates for the consumer, 27%, 30%. Rates starting to go up, so that's difficult. But for you, it's a little bit easier for you to accept that you're going to pay a 3% tax, if you will, on your patient buying your service because of the convenience of the financing that's provided by, say, American Express, right? With the lenders that lend specifically for care, the market has proven that it's willing to accept a higher financing fee, right? They have products 7%, 9%, 11%, depends on the length of the interest-free period for the patient. What are the terms that are favorable to you versus the terms that are favorable to the patient? Those are kind of in conflict in a way.
Yes.
And so part of where I think we're also different is we believe not only are we delivering a patient acquired and financed for you for a rate that's competitive to the banks that are only delivering the financing, but that we are also we're creating an opportunity to actually optimize, almost like a marketplace, really, to optimize the lending rate. For some doctors and some patients, that may mean give the best rate to the patient or give the patient the rate that gives them the lowest monthly payment, even if it's going to result in more interest to them. But maybe for another loan, it's give them the rate that gives them the lowest, the longest tail of 0%, highest haircut to the surgeon, but fills that spot in 2 weeks that you have unfilled.
And who makes that decision? Do you make it as a company? Does the doctor make it, surgeon? Does the patient? Or is it a combination of the above?
So it's a combination, right? The surgeon has to accept certain products, right? Just like we do today with lenders. But we believe that some of these other lenders, rather than, you asked me a question, how are we different from those companies as competitors? And I don't necessarily see them as competitors. I see them potentially as partners.
Okay.
They could actually, the way a lending tree for mortgages says, we can lend our own money, or we can have Quicken Loans and, Bank of America and other companies actually lend through our platform, or acquire their patients, their customers through the platform. And this allows somebody who wants to buy a house to learn who are the good realtors, what are the best houses I should buy, what houses can I afford, and who's going to give me the money to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Or loan me the money, not give me the money.
So in this case, it might be a facelift or a breast augmentation.
Right. So we think that by putting that entire patient journey together, that's, we'll help you acquire the patient, finance them for you, give them the price transparency, help you have authority to educate them. We think that full stack approach on the funnel is a differentiator. And we also see that we can introduce ourselves, though, through partnerships, either with the banks coming onto our platform to offer products through us, or conversely, introducing our financing step in, say, the Real Self workflow. So, without saying too much, we've had conversations with some of these companies, and they're moving forward, I think, in a really optimistic way. And I think that, I've had a profile on Real Self for many years, and it's created some value for me. I think that's a platform that's looking to modernize further and expand their markets. And we think things can be very synergistic with some of these other companies in the space.
That makes sense. Tom Siri was on the program, The Technology of Beauty.
That's right.
And I've been a long-time fan of Tom and his company. So maybe you would partnership, or you would partner with something like
right.
Tom's
So we've
company?
talked. Tom and I have talked, and our team has talked to the leadership, the current in-house leadership there, and long story short, we think there's a great way that we don't have to replace Real Self. We don't have to necessarily go up head to head with Real Self. Likewise, we don't have to replace Care Credit or Alphion. Burger King didn't replace McDonald's. Pepsi didn't replace Coca-Cola. And there were Burger King and McDonald's for years before there was Wendy's, and now there's a Shake Shack and In-N-Out, and all these other companies that provide services and products that consumers appreciate and like. That's the American way. We have choice. Right. So you don't have to be a monopoly. In fact, we consider that un-American.
Right.
We break up monopolies like we're trying to do with some of these tech companies out there, or that was done with AT&T, because we believe that healthy competition, a rising tide raises all
and it's good
ships.
for the consumer.
And it's good for the consumer. It gives them choice, and it helps give them pricing arbitrage as well.
So as a plastic surgeon listening to this and watching this program, what would you say to the plastic surgeons as opposed to the consumers? I'm going to ask you about the consumers.
Sure.
I get the consumer piece totally.
Right.
You're providing financing and an acquisition. They're finding you.
Right.
They're finding the docs and so forth. What's in it for the surgeon?
Sure.
Besides obviously a patient that's financed. But
right.
Can they trim some of their patient acquisition costs?
Well, that's our premise. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, run with that. I'm curious. I'm sitting here now and putting my plastic surgeon hat on.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I'm the plastic surgeon, and I'm coming to you.
Right.
You have this model, this business.
Sure.
What's in it for me?
Right. So we have a couple of concepts here. One is if you look at the like we talked about earlier, the cost to acquire that patient, if that's, say, 3% of your sales price for the procedure that they're buying.
Okay.
It actually works out even better for things like, laser packages and MyElevate and treatments like that are sort of the $3,000 to $6,000 kind of range. It's actually a really great economic model, I think, where you can see the value. Because if you're spending $300 to acquire somebody for, let's call it a $6,000
so that's 5%.
procedure. So that's 5%. And then you have to, and then if that patient chooses to finance, and you happen to participate in financing plans today that are offered by the incumbents,
what if they throw it on a credit card?
So that's 8%.
3% right there.
So that's 8%.
8%,
right? So if we acquired that patient and you paid us 8%, it's neutral to you from the standpoint of the economic cost. If they do anything, if they don't do cash, if they do any of the other financing platforms with anything other than their pure credit card rate, you're going to be paying more than that 3%. You're going to maybe pay 7% on top of the 5% that you paid to acquire the patient. Now you're talking about a 12, maybe 13% acquisition plus financing bundle. And if we beat that, there's arbitrage there for you right away.
And you're bringing the patient to me?
Correct. That's the idea.
So potentially, hypothetically, I could be sitting there not doing any marketing, and you're bringing a patient to my office.
We think so.
Interesting.
Yeah. We have to spend money on customer acquisition.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
So you get this, whatever it is that you charge, the provider, me.
Sure.
But you have to market your services. You have to acquire the patient now.
Right.
And so
that's the heavy lifting.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the risk, right? That's the risk that, in this model is maybe we don't do that any better than people are able to do it for themselves, or we can't get, better rates for doing that. We think we can do that. We have a team of people who have great expertise in that. We have, one of my co-founders is a quantitative finance guru. The guy basically, he left UBS, I think it was, where he was at the foreign exchange, hedge desk essentially, and started his own. He basically, at home, traded Forex and credit swaps and other derivatives that are premised pure, basically on the notion of the time value of money and how to make money on that spread. And he did that very successfully. And he could have just stopped there, but he's like serial entrepreneurs, people have that bug, you can't stop, right? So we think that there's a value there. And then the other part of it is the capacity argument, right? So if we can help you fill the unfilled capacity, in fact, we actually have some intellectual property on some of these concepts that we've filed and are I think I'm very excited about. I think the idea that if you look at what we do today as plastic surgeons to fill our capacity, maybe you don't have to do this, but I find myself sometimes, if that patient, remember that patient we saw, she wanted a facelift, the price was a little high, I got a gap in my schedule now in 3 weeks.
Call her up,
tell her we'll give her that $1,000 or $2,000 off that she wants. It's an ad hoc discount. The difference between that and going through an acquisition and financing platform is that I have now published to her that I'm willing to discount my services.
Right.
So there's a kind of information transparency, and that's good in a way because you don't want to be hiding costs from patients. You don't want, we don't believe in baiting and switching patients. So you're transparent either way. If you charge somebody $10,000 for an operation and you're getting a 10%, fee for that because you've used a financing platform, so you're getting $9,000 rather than 10. The patient is paying $10,000 plus their interest and what have you. The price to them is $10,000. Right. And you told them that's the price. You are actually just you're accepting that you're willing to take less than that net. The difference is if you discount it to $9,000 because you want to win them for that open slot, you're netting the same, but now the price to the market, published knowable price, has actually come down. You've basically raced yourself down a little bit to the bottom.
Right.
And we all will do that ad hoc at times for the unfilled capacity. But what about a system that can actually help through some automation and some human effort, help bring those patients in to fill the capacity? Airlines and hotels do this all the time, right?
Absolutely.
You could try to wait till the last minute to get a plane ticket or to get a hotel room, and sometimes you get the last minute deals, right? You get these deals where it's like, I can't believe I got a room at this hotel for 30% less than normal because I went on
Priceline. But the
Priceline.
flip side can happen also.
Right. Flip side is you're like, I need a flight tomorrow, and all I can get are these $2,000 tickets, right? Which is, we don't do that. At least I hope my colleagues don't do that, where you price gouge somebody because of now their urgency. But it's this model of really what's the value based on urgency and unfilled capacity. How do you optimize that? And you can optimize that for the provider, you can optimize it for the customer, or you can try to figure out best fit algorithms. So we've actually done a little bit of research on, so this is a concept called matching markets. And actually, Alvin Roth, a professor he's tenured at both Harvard and Stanford, but I think he's at Stanford now, won the Nobel Prize for this. And it's the notion of, when there's a market for products or services where price or perceived quality are not the only metrics that determine value and the final selling price.
Okay.
Or not necessarily the selling price, but the likelihood of closing the transaction and having a successful deal that both parties say we're happy with, right?
Okay.
There are types of transactions where it's not governed the same way as the traditional economic model. So, for example, he was called upon to revamp the way residency matching is done. So, back in the older days,
he started the match.
They went to him and they said, we have this problem that people get offered this take it or leave it job offer. So Mass General offers you, take an intern job with us, you have 2 weeks to answer it. And you're like, but I'm thinking I might want to train at Hopkins or UCLA or somewhere else, and my interview isn't for a couple of weeks. The rolling admissions concept that we still kind of have for medical school is in some ways flawed that way, because some students might feel almost compelled, forced to accept an offer because it's a bird in the hand,
right?
Because it may be their dream school, and then they're not supposed to collude and talk behind the scenes. I was on the admissions committee of my medical school as a student, and I'd never got any private information that this student actually already had a slot at Harvard or whatever. But, there was sort of this, maybe urban legend that kind of went on behind the scenes, that like when they knew that you were holding a spot here, well, then we don't have to rank you that highly, or we can move on past you. And you might be like, well, I'm holding that spot because they offered me it first. Job market is the same way. Right?
Yes.
They might want to work for you, and they say, well, Dr. Marina is not hiring right now for this role, but somebody else, somewhere else in the Santa Monica or LA area has the job open, and maybe that's not the practice I really want to work for, but the job is now.
Yes.
So
sealed bird in the hand,
right?
You just said.
Right. So when that algorithm was changed for the match, it was the notion that you have people who want slots and people who want people to fill those slots. And we're offering the positions. And how do you match that so that hopefully most of the people here get what they want and these programs get who they want, right? And sometimes it works out great, right? I matched at my number one program, and they, presumably obviously ranked me in their, top group of people. But that doesn't happen for everybody, and it might not have happened to me either, and so, but doing that system, they thought there was more parity. There was less asymmetry of power in the transaction. Another example is kidney transplants. You might need a kidney. I hope you don't, but if God forbid you need a kidney transplant, you might have a sibling, but they're not matched to you. And maybe I need one, but I have a sibling who's not matched to me, and maybe a third person needs a kidney transplant, but their sibling is matched to me, and my sibling is matched to you, and your sibling is matched to them. And so they help this daisy chain kind of, so there you're matching among providers and consumers of a scarce resource.
Okay.
And you're trying to figure out how do you do that algorithm so that the most people get the most value out of the ecosystem. And so that's where we think this idea of capacity optimization, a more profitable customer acquisition and financing experience for you as the doctor makes sense. And the surgeons who've invested in with us, I think they understand this, and in many cases they have what I would say excess capacity, not necessarily because that surgeon has excess capacity, but maybe they have an associate they brought on. Why did they bring on that associate, right? They brought on the associate because, Grant Stevens is booked out for a year. These patients come in and say, well, I think I'm going to go to somebody else because I can't get in with Dr. Stevens, and I want this surgery in the next 6 months for whatever reason. In my personal life, there's a wedding in a year or whatever.
Sure.
So you scratch your head and you say, well, how do I not lose that business? Because that's a revenue. Those patients want me. I don't even have to market to them. They actually want me, but I can't fulfill the need, right? I can't fulfill the demand.
Right.
So I'm going to bring somebody else on who can help fulfill the demand, because my brand is strong enough that even if it's not Grant Stevens doing the surgery, they know that your delegate, your trusted associate, even your fellow, that these are people that you've given the stamp of approval that has authority for the patient. The patient says, I'm willing to trust. If they're good enough for Dr. Stevens, then they're definitely somebody I can trust. And what you've done there is you've almost doubled your capacity. You have an associate, you now can do twice as much surgery. But in many of these practices, that new associate is not busy right off the bat.
Right.
And so they have now, you have 200% of your original capacity, but now you're meeting 130%. You have all this unfilled capacity of the associate's time. So I've had investors, surgeons who've come to us and said, this is going to be great for my new gal or my new guy.
I'm curious. You say investors. Do they invest in your business? What do you mean by the term investors?
So we've raised like any startup, we've raised capital to support operations, and actually we're opening around to raise lending capital, because there are two parts of this. There's the lending money that we fuel our loans with, and where we're trying to use, after we've proven the concept with enough loans, we're already getting inbound interest without really any marketing yet of patients wanting to, get financed, or some of our surgeon partners who are, e-blasting their patients and saying, we're piloting this new platform. I'll give you an example. Dr. DiBernardo, very busy practice. He piloted with an e-blast to his patients about a non-surgical treatment package. And on the first day, he got something like 12 or 13 patients of his who went to our website to start the process to finance.
For that procedure. Okay. That's
so
interesting. But is he an investor into your business?
He is.
Is he part of the financing model? Is he putting up money?
Not
capital?
To finance.
Okay.
No, just operating capital.
Okay.
Like we have a whole workforce of software engineers and offshore engineers that we.
Can a surgeon use your services without being an investor?
Of course. Oh yes.
Okay, so they can participate, like Care Credit,
of course,
Alpheon. Yeah. They can call you up and say, "I want to do this."
Exactly.
Without being quoted an investor.
Course. Absolutely, 100%. Okay. In fact, we basically, I bring up investors only to say that I've seen this model where a customer base and an investor base are kind of the same initially, because people like you and I see promising technologies and we think it has a future and we want to use it in our practices.
Sure.
I mean, I have invested in some companies and sometimes it's not worked out, but in most cases it's worked out in the sense that those companies have gone on to our going concerns today, or they've made an impact in the industry. I disclose, as I'm sure you do, and as we really our ethical guidelines in our professional societies require and expect us to do. If we're an investor in something, we should disclose it so that the patient knows that they're not obliged to use something because we might have a financial interest in it. But most of us don't believe in a product because we invested in it. We invest in it because we believe in it.
Right. Exactly.
Right? You're not going to go use a device on somebody that you don't think is safe and efficacious, because it's your reputation and
I'm
your name
not going to invest in it.
You're not going to invest in it unless you believe in it.
Right.
And I've invested in some products that I don't necessarily have in my office, but I think that they're good products. And I think they're things that people will use. And so when I say that, when I was at Modernizing Medicine, I saw that they really took off. They now have, I think, over 50% of the dermatology market in the United States now for several years that use their software. So they have become the dominant player for software solutions for dermatologists. How did that start? It started with them going to dermatologists, and the co-founder is a dermatologist, says, I'm one of you. I know that the solutions that I was looking at to solve pain points for me in my practice weren't meeting my needs, or there were unmet needs. I helped build this thing. Try it out. Let them try it out for free. And they said, this is good. It's actually so good. Not only do I want to use it, but are you guys raising money for this? What's the growth plan for this business? So you build evangelism because people see the value. And I'm not here to I'm here to talk to you about it, but it's not about selling it. It's the idea that I think that if you will not succeed if you don't create value. Right, I don't really believe. There's a fake it to. I've been reading all this. I'm devouring all the Theranos stuff. I'm just like voracious about the story of kind of Silicon Valley excess and people who really sort of allegedly fake it until they make it. Right, and that's not what we're trying to do here. I actually think that we have a real product, a technology stack that we've vetted with technical people at RealSelf and others, and they say, yeah, actually, now that I've looked under the hood. You guys, this is not vaporware. right? This is actually a real software solution. It's a real, we think, a value creator. Let's pilot it. Let's try it out. That's what we're trying to move that conversation to the next step of actually a technical integration. We've already had those conversations with Simplast, and we're trying to do that with Nextech and other companies. We are excited about opportunities to try to partner with leading companies in the industry.
It's a natural wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
You would
marketing companies, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. So I'm excited about it. And for me, it just jazzes me because it gives me a way to have those creative and intellectual, energies kind of, it diversifies, because now I've gotten to a point where I do, I do a lot of 1 or 2 operations. I do a moderate amount of, let's say 7 or 8 others, and I don't do very many of some other ones. Not because I don't know how to do them, or not that I don't do them well necessarily. There are people who do some of those better than I do. I'm totally okay with saying that.
Yeah, sure.
But it also becomes sort of the things you get known for, the things that feed on, and then they grow and so on. So part of the reason that I did pick plastic surgery and not heart surgery was that I loved the diversity in the way that it could stimulate your creative right brain and your analytical left brain. And so this kind of project does both.
Yeah. Well, I share your entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, I know.
And I love to do surgery, so I can totally relate. So if you had a crystal ball and
Sure.
you're looking in the future, what do you see here as you look out onto the horizon? What's the world going to look like 1, 3, 5 years from now?
Well, I think people don't know economically if, with inflation and interest rate changes and, what's going to happen with war and so on, what's going to happen. In 2008, we all remember, those of us who were in practice then, we remember that it was an existential threat to the aesthetic industry.
Absolutely.
For several years. And it took, probably would argue, took 10, 15 years to get out of that. Not quite 15 years out, but the difference in COVID, many of us thought COVID was going to, do the same thing, right? That people were going to be out of work, but it turned out that allowed them to just recover at home, and they were getting, economic support to help them be able to actually still have discretionary income. So I think the question here, one of the doctors I was talking to about this said, well, what's going to happen in a couple of years? Wallets might tighten up. And I said, well, if the availability of credit is there, in 2008, it wasn't there.
Right.
That's a big difference. If credit tightens up in an environment where people don't have as much free cash on hand, credit becomes important to them. And their ability, they don't stop wanting plastic surgery, but they don't necessarily want to take the $10,000 sitting in their bank account and spend it right now, all at once. They want to spend $299 a month. And so I think that it actually, in contrast to some people who are worried that maybe an economic contraction could result in just generally less, plastic surgery, that may be true, but I think the proportion of that requires good financing and patient acquisition financing become even more important, in my opinion, in an economic downturn. So that I would say, I think we're poised for success in either a downturn or just a growing economy where people do have more discretionary money.
I would totally agree. I think a downturn is actually going to be bullish for you.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I'm not looking for a downturn, but
we're not looking for a downturn. But I don't see a downturn as being regressive or punitive to your market.
Yeah.
I see it just the opposite.
Yeah.
Actually, people want to look their best. They want to be beautiful. They want to look and feel their very best.
Yeah.
And they're going to pay for it one way or another.
Right.
And you're giving them a vehicle with which to pay for it.
We think so.
And as are the other financing companies,
Right.
as to your point. And if you're going to offload some of that credit to these other companies and all, that's an interesting market. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been my pleasure.
Learning about your business model, getting to know you better. I can't wait to see you at our next meeting, the Aesthetic Society.
Yeah, excited.
Our beloved society,
That's right.
the American Society for
Another
Aesthetic Plastic
Egyptian,
Surgery.
by the way.
That's right, absolutely. Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank
My
you very
pleasure.
much
Thank you
for
so
joining
much.
us
Yes,
and for
thank you.
coming up. And I look forward to following your product and your business and seeing how you do.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been our pleasure. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today on the Technology of Beauty. And as you just saw, we definitely interview the movers and shakers, the beauty business. And this is clearly the future in access and financing to aesthetic plastic surgery. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.